are going to be doing it virtually, like everyone else. So next Monday Eve from 7:30 p.m. to 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. You can join us. Oops, I wanted to put where you can join us at. You can RSVP there, and you can listen to the African American Choral Ensemble. The IU Jacobs School of Music Ballet Department will be doing a dance. There'll be a bevy of government officials. But most importantly, we have Dr. Khalid El Hakim, who will be speaking on The Truth Hurts, Black History and Healing the Racial Divide. So now for the service projects that are happening that day and over the 40 Days of Peace. Just wanted to tell you about some of them. Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority at the Kappa Tau Omega chapter, which everybody likes to point out that is our new vice president's sorority. We'll be doing Living the Dream. It's building your social justice toolkit as an aspiring activist. Their project supports middle and high school students in understanding the tenets of activism, advocacy, and social justice through creative activities using pop culture and media, literary materials, and personal storytelling to provide them with tangible ways to tackle issues that are meaningful to them and their communities. The Bloomington Community Orchard will be doing I Have a Dream to Build and Share, and is collaborating with the Boys and Girls Club to engage kids in positive community activities, increase their knowledge of healthy food, where it comes from, and how to grow and harvest it, and encourage them to dream big. The Monroe County Youth Council will be doing Spring Into Action. They will host 2 virtual education events, one service event to promote acceptance and advocacy, and one education event will focus on gender and sexuality, and the other will focus on environmental justice. The service event is going to be a park cleanup to promote environmental health. My Sister's Closet of Monroe County will be doing workforce needs of women overcoming poverty through a pandemic. Volunteer operatives will be cleaning, shoe and purse sorting, donation sorting, more, and all more, while having regular MLK reflections to encourage ongoing volunteering in the community. And Noah's Ark, a spiritual journey towards understanding. It's a forum for dialogue about Dr. Khalid El Hakim's speech and building hope. It's offering a couple of dialogue opportunities and will be in the end of January and the February. You can register for that by sending an email to that in the chat, Noah's Ark there. And finally, the RISE will be the Transitional Housing Program at Middleweight. Will focus on revitalizing our community, their community room for residents in an effort to provide individuals fleeing domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking the necessary space to heal and foster their strengths to further develop their capacities for self-determination. And also in the chat is the ability to register for any of many other opportunities and see what else is going on MLK Day. So feel free to take a look at that. And I'll close with just 2 quotes. The aftermath of violence is bitterness. The aftermath of nonviolence is the creation of beloved community, so that when the battle is over, a new relationship comes into being. The end is reconciliation. The end is redemption. That is a love that may well be the salvation of our civilization. And Dr. Martin Luther King also said, a standard one that I've used numerous times on posters and everything, everybody can be great because everybody can serve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. And yes, we will provide opportunities in the roundabout, including some that we will mention later in the program. Now for introduction of our guests. Jim Bright, would you like to introduce your guests to start?
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. Pleased to have with us here today Trudy Rhodes, who is a Butler alum living near Phoenix in Cave Creek, Arizona. Welcome, Trudy. Also expecting today Bob Hamill. I haven't seen Bob on my screen here yet, but hope Bob is with us. And Bob, as you know, was the honoree for this year's Bloomington Rotary Toast, and he'll be returning in a couple of weeks when we celebrate our success there with the toast. Suzanne Owen, I think it's Suzanne, is with us here today, and so good to have you. So I those are the three I know about. Is there anybody I'm missing? Any other guests I have out there? Oh, Ken Beckley. Can't forget Ken. Ken is the former head of the IU Alumni Association, among other things. And he is hanging out this winter in Fort Myers, Florida. So welcome, Ken Beckley.
Thanks so much. We have other guests of our speaker. Graham, would you like to introduce your guests?
I sure will. Thank you for having us. It's a great honor today. I've got several guests. I've got a former classmate of mine from IU, Michelle Mercoda, is on here. My mother, Nancy Claypool. I wanted someone who would at least give the presentation a thumbs up to be with us today. So she's joining us from Louisville, and I'm trying to see if I've got any. Mark Bradford, who's a great friend, and I'm told is a former exiled member of the Bloomington Rotary Club, is here as well. And I think that's about it, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for joining our program today. Anyone that we've missed that's joining us for the first time or the millionth time? We're happy to have you. Okay. Thank you for being here today, and thanks to our producers, Natalie Blaze, Michael Shermis, Sally Gaskell, and Aaron Davis. Additional support was provided by Alon Barker, who's back with us. We're so glad to have you here. Roundabout reporter for the week is Kyla Cox-Deckard. We have some birthdays. Hank Walter, January 11th, yesterday, and Marty Donnelly today, January 12th. Happy birthday. One membership anniversary, Lance Eberly has been a Rotarian in our club for 19 years. Congratulations, Lance. Thank you for being a part of the Rotary family. Our previous Rotarian, Bloomington Rotarian, Del Brinkman, has returned to his home following a brief stay in the hospital, and let's send him some notes to lift up his spirits. We will have his address information in the roundabout for you all so that we can drop him a line, and his email. He'd love to hear from you. We have some special news. Rotarian and board member Jim Sims will now serve as the president of the Bloomington City Council, as voted by his fellow council members Wednesday at the council's organizational meeting. Congrats, Jim. He's not with us today because he is in a committee meeting, as I'm sure will continue to happen, but he will be joining us moving forward when he can. He is the second Black person to serve on the council in the city's history. This is from the HT. Sims acknowledged the first Black council member, Paul Swain Jr., while thanking the council members for electing him as president. This is a transition of leadership, not a transfer of power, he said. My duty is to uphold all legal authority of each member of this council and to set the operational tone of collaboration, compassion, collegiality, and respect of those we serve, which is our constituents, as well as the executive branch of our city and all other elected colleagues across Monroe County. If you know Jim, you know he will uphold those things that he has promised to do, and so congrats to Jim. We heard about a few volunteering opportunities today from Michael Shermis, and those, like we said, will be mentioned in the roundabout for you to check out. You can always go to Bloomington Volunteer Network to find opportunities as well. And we also have a unique announcement from Sandy Keller, who's going to tell us more about My Sister's Closet and what they're doing at this time.
Thank you, Ashley. My Sister's Closet always has a really great volunteer opportunity during MLK. We are extending this throughout the 40 Days of Peace. So if you can't make it next Monday, we can make sure that you can volunteer throughout January and February as well. We, every hour on the hour at my sister's closet during MLK, there is a very special table with all these MLK quotes. And we pick 2 people on the hour to go choose a quote, and they stand up on a ladder, and at the top of their lungs, they read these quotes. And it really is inspiring, and everybody enjoys it. So I would like nothing more than to have my fellow Rotarians visit my sister's closet for a 2-hour shift next Monday. Our space has an electrostatic filter, which cleans pathogens 24/7 in the air. So while we do wear masks and we do social distancing and hand washing, it is a very safe place to volunteer if you would like to show up. And we are big enough that we can have several stations where people are separated from each other. But there will be several different types of activities there. If you haven't polished shoes in a while, we can show you how. If you'd like to help build a shelf, we can show you how. But there's lots of different things. And the opportunity that's on right now, the Volunteer Network, is not the only place you can sign up. So I do have that in the chat. However, it does say that you have to stand for 2 hours. For people who would like to sit, we can make it possible that you could still volunteer and sit during your shift. So please join us. We'd love to see you. Thanks.
Thank you, Sandy. Okay, now we have a chance to share what we're happy about through Happy Dollars. If you would like to donate to Happy Dollars, we'll put the link in the chat. You can do that through PayPal. And the first person that raised their hand was Owen, and then we'll do Phil Eskew.
Thank you. I am pleased with the fact that the Butler people are here because I have very good memories of Butler. One is Ed Bennett, who was my professor in my senior year of college, and he persuaded me to go to graduate school. I would not be in Bloomington without him. Another person is Jonathan Purvis, who's Vice President for Advancement at Butler, which means he raises all the money for Butler. He taught me how to swim 24 years ago. And I want to remember Glenn Miller, who introduced a song in honor of the Butler Bulldogs, Blues in the Night.
Thank you for that, Owen. Phil?
I joined Carmel Rotary January 16, 1981. So today I have 40 happy bucks because I have 40 years today of perfect attendance. I don't know that people realize, but to get your name in the Rotarian, you have to have 50 years of perfect attendance to get your name mentioned in that. I also want to give a shout out to Graham. Graham and I are good friends, and he's invited me several times. I think he's the current president of the Indianapolis Kiwanis Club, and he's invited me to share some of his meetings as well. And of course, I've already ordered his book. So there's my 40 happy dollars.
Congrats, Phil. Liz Irwin raised her hand.
Well, thanks, Ashley. And I just wanted to say that I have an announcement to make today. And in honor of my 5 years at Smithville, I will be donating 5 happy dollars. I've actually accepted a new position managing executive communications for Catalent. So I will be leaving my role at Smithville. My plan is to continue on with Rotary, however, of course, because you're all very near and dear to my heart. There will be some transition period, and I'm not quite sure about the timing yet, but I did want to share that exciting news with each of you, and I am positive that Smithville will continue on as an organizational member. Of course, you've seen Aaron Brewington. He's been participating, and I know how much Rotary means to him, and so I'm sure you can still see him every week, and hopefully me too.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congrats, Liz. And we're so delighted that you're going to stay with us. We would hate to see you go. So Okay, Charlotte?
Yes, I'm going to put in 10 happy dollars for a number of things and take one away for unhappy. I'm very happy that we're still here today, that we still have a nation and it was theoretically indivisible with liberty and justice for all, but we have yet to build on that. And I'm happy that we have an explanation in, or that we have a lively show of reality that there is room for progress with the election in Georgia, which was, I know we're not supposed to be political, but we can't help but be too political in these days. This is a political time, and our lives and living in the United States depend on our being vigilant about the good things that happen. So that's I'll put $10 altogether for all the good things that happened. And I'm sorry, I won't take any money away for the bad things, but we know that they're there, and I hope that they get resolved in the next short time in peace and reconciliation. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Can I say something? Can you hear me?
Yes, Gus, go ahead.
Okay, I want to put in $14, 14 happy dollars, because this past Saturday, my wife celebrated 14 years of being cancer-free. And at this point, we just want to keep counting years.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have happy dollars too. I have 10 happy dollars for Butler, because without Butler, I wouldn't be here. Because back in the early 30s, my mom was at Kappa and my dad was a fight out there, and they met on a blind date.
All right. Any other happy dollars to share?
Yes. Bill?
Bill.
I'd like to contribute 10 happy dollars. First, 5 happy dollars. 5 of that $10 is because I got my first COVID shot this morning. Okay. And the second $5 is because my mother graduated from Butler back in 1960 on the same day that I got my undergraduate degree from Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology.
Wonderful. Okay, if we don't have any other happy dollars to share, I will introduce Lauren Snyder to set up our guest speakers for today. Lauren?
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I probably do need to reintroduce myself, as I've been noticeably absent throughout most of this pandemic, which Natalie, I should be shamed, but I apologize. But it is so good to see everybody, particularly some of our guests, and I miss seeing everybody. And it's nice to see Graham's mom on the phone. Good to see you again, as it's been a while since we've been at a Butler basketball game to enjoy that time together in fellowship. But it is great to see everybody. And I'm going to not read a fancy introduction or anything, because Graham is a good friend of mine. Jerry, I don't know you personally. I'll let Graham provide a little bit of an introduction there. But Graham Honaker is a special person in Morgan in my life. Morgan and I met at Butler University. She was a Theta and I was a Phi Psi on campus. So very, very happy that I hope my son Coleman, two-year-old now, is happy that we met and can say similar comments, Connie, in the future. But we met at Butler and are happy and proud Butler Bulldogs. But Graham Honaker and I started, I'll make a very brief personal introduction. The way it got all set up was I was in, I think it was Graham, it was 2013. The CEO of Hilliard Lions reached out to me while I was down in Florida visiting my parents and said, you got to meet this guy from Louisville. He wrote his thesis master's paper on me, the CEO of Hilliard Lions at the time. And he said, you got to meet Graham. He's starting to work at Butler. He's an incredible individual. No lie, less than 5 minutes later, Morgan gets an email from one of her colleagues down in Louisville that says, hey, there's this guy named Graham. You've got to meet him. He's working at Butler now. So Morgan and I both were strongly encouraged. We did end up meeting with Graham and has become a fast friend, which is now for almost 8 years now. And it's been an honor to spend time with him. But he is, he won't take credit for this, but he has been integral in the fundraising for Butler University and the new college, Lacey College of Business, in a lot of the different efforts that the university has done. If you haven't been at Butler's campus in the past 10 years, go, you won't recognize it. It is transformed. Some would say for the better, some would say for the worse, but as far as academic attainment goes, I believe it's for the better. So with no further ado, I want to introduce a good friend of mine to tell you a little bit about his story and how the Cinderella story came together with he and Jerry. So Graham, thank you for being here, my friend.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is a tremendous honor for me. And I say this sincerely. This book process has been about two and a half years. Today is one of the real highlights for me. I have just great respect for Bloomington. Bloomington's a special place for me. I've got a master's degree from IU. I love Bloomington. There's some people on this call who I just have tremendous respect for. Lauren, no doubt, but Phil Eskew has become a really good friend. Mark Bradford, who I said is your exiled former member, is just an awesome guy. I've gotten to know Jim Bright, and then others. Michelle Mercoda is a good friend who I went to IU with, and I'd be remiss if I left out my mom here. But and I'm going to get to Bob Hamill in a minute, but I really, first of all, I really admire what Rotary does. As Lauren said, I'm a Kiwanian, and I hope you don't hold that against me. But I really value what Rotarians do in the service above self principle. One disappointment I do have is Phil reached out to me last fall about an event you were having for Bob Hamill, and that was going to support the Hoosier Hills Food Bank, which is a really special place. And I misread it. I thought it was a roast of Bob Hamill, and so I went ahead and bought the ticket. And then when I saw the event, I was pretty disappointed. But we've done about 9 or 10 of these so far on the new book, which I'll put in the chat link here that gives you more information. But I want to begin this one differently than I've begun any of the other calls, and that is to acknowledge Bob Hamill. And I think Bob's on here. I can't see him, but I think Bob's on here. Honest to God truth, this book never would have been written without Bob Hamill. And I'll tell you a really brief story because I do want to get to the book. When I was growing up, and Phil and my mom can attest to this, I was just a basketball junkie. There's a line in our new book that I didn't know anything about G.I. Joe or Darth Vader, but I could tell you all of the Indiana Mr. basketballs for like the last 30 years. So when I was a teenager, all I cared about was basketball. And when I was 15, I was trying to find this book that Bob Hamill had written called Night with the Hoosiers. I couldn't find it anywhere. And I was scrambling. So I found the phone number for the Bloomington Herald-Times, and I called him and I got a hold of him. And that's the thing. I wasn't calling girls at that age. I was calling people like Bob Hamill. That kind of tells you what my high school days were like. But he didn't have the book, but he was an idol of mine then. So flash forward now, 30 years later, I'm at Butler, and I get to know Bob, give him a tour of Hinkle Fieldhouse, and just become friends. And back in the fall, I sent him the first version of this book. And I was very nervous about doing it. And, it's like sending my idol here, a draft, thinking it's going to come back, with a lot of red lettering on it. And Bob was the first person that said, I think you've got a shot here. I think you've got a shot here. And you can only imagine what that meant to me. So here, full circle, 30 years. I honestly say this book never would have happened without Bob. The bottom line is, if you don't like the book, you all know how to get in touch with Bob as well, I think. But the final piece of that story is a year ago, Bob gives me this book, Night with the Hoosiers. So I think that, again, you know how special Bob Hamill is, but, and I'm a little emotional here talking about it, his influence on me really made this book possible. So we're going to dive in. My co-authors on the call, Jerry Logan, who, Lauren, you actually have met. You met him in Boston over dinner a couple years ago. But Jerry is just a wonderful guy, my co-author, and works at Gordon College. we came about this project in two very different aspects. I'm in my 9th year at Butler. Jerry was getting his PhD at Boston College University. He had no tie to Butler whatsoever. And about 3 years ago, he called us and said, I'm doing my dissertation on the notion of what athletic success can do for a university. And he came to campus, he interviewed about 30 of us. We really hit it off, stayed in touch. And I had been trying to catalog all these things that had been happening at Butler since the Final Fours. And Jerry ended up writing his dissertation. It was excellent. He sent it to me. So when COVID hit in March, I called him. I said, you know, Jerry, I'm gonna have some more time on my hands. And my wife can tell you I'm not very good when I have time on my hands. She wants me busy all the time. And I said, why don't we dive into this project further? And we went at it, and we ended up getting our new book, which is called The Cinderella Strategy, the game plan behind Butler University's rise to prominence, published, which will be published here on March 1st. I'll send the link here in a minute. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to give you a brief snippet of why this book. Jerry's going to give you a little bit of background on the broader history of Butler. Everybody thinks about these two Final Fours started it all, and it actually, that history traces way back. I'm going to give you a couple of kind of stunning results of what's happened at Butler since the Final Fours, and then we'll wrap up with some lessons, which really this book, it's about Butler, but we view it as a strategy, a culture, a leadership book that can be applied to about any organization. So the motivations for the book were really, for me, from an inside perspective, to try to tell this story, this Butler story, which many know, but it went deeper. And so wanted to share, you know, this transformation at Butler. Also, that's happened in a really, really difficult time for higher education. We saw it at St. Joseph's up in Rensselaer. It's a very tough time for small, private, liberal arts colleges like Butler, whose enrollments are dropping, financials are in bad shape. Whereas Butler, we've gone the other way. We've been really blessed to go the other way. So wanted to tell it from that perspective. And then finally, and I'm a bit biased, but you know, college basketball's it's not been the best time for it. You know, there's been a dark cloud hanging over some programs in terms of the recruiting. The one and done, people say, is watered down the game. And while we're not perfect, we're close. You know, I thought Butler, you know, is really an outlier, a program that's doing it the right way. And if you look, since those Final Fours, has continued to win. So wanted to tell it from that perspective. And then I guess the final one is there are all these books on how Starbucks does things, and Marriott and Southwest Airlines. There are very few books you can pick up of how can I learn from a university. And so with all that being said, we dove into this thing, and I'm going to turn it over to Jerry here, it's been an amazing journey with him. He's going to give you a little bit of background about when this story actually started. And I'll put the book link here in the chat.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's really nice to be with you. I have not had any clam chowder today, so I should be alert, clear-headed, and able to talk about the book with clarity. As Graham mentioned, I came to Butler knowing absolutely no one. I only knew Butler for reasons that most people, I think, probably outside of Indiana knew Butler, which is because they made a couple Cinderella runs back in 2010, 2011. I was working on my dissertation at Boston College, as Graham said, and I got into this. Well, you know what I did? I kept saying, I kind of want to study athletics, and I kept waiting for a faculty member to say, no, you can't do that. And no one ever did. They kept letting me get away with it. So when it came time for the dissertation, I said, I really want to look into what happens when a university gets a lot of attention and notoriety from a Cinderella run during March Madness. I've seen articles about George Mason getting a lot of earned media attention from their run to the Final Four, and all these radio reports about rises in applications. And I'd really like to study that. So the idea that I was trying to study and that our book pursues is this notion of a halo effect, which is when you have some high profile athletic success, it creates this something of an afterglow where there's lots of positive attention and vibes coming your way, and people are looking and learning where you're at. This happened to Gonzaga. Their very first run to the Sweet 16 back in 1999, they had to every press conference tell people how to actually say the name of the school. Now we know it's Gonzaga. Now we call them Zaga, for sure, the Zags. So I wanted to really dive in and see what's this worth to a university. It's all about attention, and that's what's the possibility, the opportunity that's opened up, especially when a team tells a really good Cinderella story like Butler did. So I decided I wanted to study Butler, and I found my way into talking to Barry Collier, who is the current athletic director. And he said on the phone, the very first time we spoke, he said, yeah, this started way back in 1989. I said, wow. In my head, I said, wow, I was 4 then. I might have bit off a lot more than I wanted to chew. This is a lengthy story, but I was also a history major and will forever be a history major. So that appealed to me. So just a quick bit of the backstory here is that, like Barry said, and would tell most people, and most people at Butler would say, this story started in 1989, not in 2010, or not a few years before when Brad Stevens became head coach, but it started in 1989. When the president at Butler, Jeff Bannister, decided, we have this enormous gymnasium. It's historic, it's lovely. We are in the state of Indiana. Basketball seems to matter here. Why don't we invest in men's basketball a little bit? See if we can make it an actual flagship. The problem at the time was that the men's basketball program was kind of on the skids. They'd just gone 11-17. This is a great little data point. For the 1989 season, they had 15 season ticket holders. That's 15 season ticket holders. So not an enormous resource base at all. And in fact, when Hoosiers came to Hinkle to tape the final scene for the movie, the movie was set in 1954. They were filming in 1985. They had to make very few adjustments to Hinkle to make it look like it was 1954. So you had a building that was about 3 decades out of date too. That was the program they decided to revive. And Barry Collier was actually the guy they pegged as head coach to do that. So the very first thing that Butler did was they identified in their own backyard a resource, a flagship sport that made sense in Indiana, and they started to invest in it. Barry Collier turned the program around over his tenure there, 11 seasons, I think. His first season, 6-22. By the end of his 11th, 23-8. He went away to University of Nebraska, came back in 2006 as the athletic director. And at that point, the men's basketball program was in good shape, but he found an athletic department that was a little bit out of whack too. This is one really telling statistic. He said, hey, we were asking our student athletes the repeat customer question. If you had to do it all over again, would you come back to Butler? For 2 years running, only 50% said yes. He said that was an enormous problem. That was not happening with students across the rest of the university, but it was in athletics. And they found that the resource base was way out of whack. So they weren't giving student athletes a positive experience. So he spent time kind of writing the larger ship. So you had this kind of small core men's basketball program that was turning around. Then you had the larger athletic department that Barry Collier was again starting to get in order. The third piece of the puzzle was kind of aligning with the rest of the institution. And Jeff Bannister, that president in 1989, was a very accelerator type president, took a lot of risks, swung for the fences, invested in men's basketball. The president who followed him, Bobby Fong, was more of a stabilizer. So he put a really hard ceiling on athletics. He said, you got to generate your own revenue. You're not getting it from the institution. That made Butler Athletics have to make some difficult decisions, cutting a couple sports, putting in courtside seating and raising ticket prices, which caused a little bit of a kerfuffle. Along the way, Butler also decided we're not investing in big time football. We're going to be members of the Pioneer League, and that over the long term has really benefited them, but at the time was not necessarily a popular decision. So the hard choices they had to make under Bobby Fong over the long term came back to benefit them. And in 2011, when they were middle of the second Final Four run, they were also doing a presidential search. They ended up hiring Jim Danko, another accelerator president. And that's the moment, from our perspective, when everything was aligned. The flagship program coming off a second consecutive Final Four appearance, telling this wonderful Cinderella story. The athletic department was in good shape. Continuity at the top with Barry Collier still there. And then a president who really understood and wanted to capitalize on this unique moment in the university's history. So there is, as I mentioned, this halo effect. It's a short time in which a university can capitalize on this attention, because the next year, March Madness goes again. Somebody else becomes the national media's darling, and Butler starts to fade away. So I'm going to turn it over to Graham to tell you the story a little bit of what Butler did to really capitalize and make this effect more lasting than it has been for other universities.
Yeah, I'm going to go quick here because we do want to have some time to answer questions. But really, the past 10 years, since it's hard to believe the 10-year anniversary of the second Final Four will be this March, which great news that the whole tournament's going to be in Indianapolis and also down at IU and Assembly Hall in Hinkle. But it's really been stunning, in my opinion. And this was another motivation for the book. So, you know, we break up the book, we give the background, we talk briefly about the Final Fours, but those have been covered. So a big focus is in this decade since, which has just been really transformational for the university. Some quick numbers, we had a PR firm estimate what did those two Final Fours mean for Butler, and they estimated 1.2 billion with a B earned media attention. So you'd have to pay 1.2 billion to get that type of attention. And Jerry mentioned George Mason and some of the other Cinderella stories have been phenomenal. You know, Gonzaga and Virginia Commonwealth, but it was that back-to-back Final Four that really cemented, I think, Butler's legend and really helped with this additional catalytic effect on the university. So what happened in the aftermath, right? I mean, we know some of the basics, but a big point was the move to the Big East Conference, which, and we have quotes in the book, would not have happened without those two Final Fours. So we went from the Horizon League to the Atlantic 10 to the Big East. We were in 3 conferences in 3 different years. The Big East has been monumental for us. And actually, we state maybe more important than those two Final Fours because of this long-lasting impact. So now, and not to knock University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, now we're in a league with Georgetown and Villanova and Creighton, great basketball programs, but also great schools. Now we're not only competing against schools who maybe have a similar endowment as ours, we're competing against Georgetown's $2 billion war chest. So it's a really, really big deal to go into the Big East. What does that also do, though? That opens up Butler to new markets. Now we're in New York, we're in DC, we're in Boston, and that's had a big impact on students coming to Butler. When I started at Butler, we were 60% in-state, 40% out-of-state. It's flipped. Okay, now we're 60% out-of-state, 40% in-state. See all kinds of students coming from both of the coasts. You know, our hub is still the Midwest. We're proud of that, but you see just this influx. Applications. When I started, we were getting about 6,500 applications. 2 years ago, we had 17,000. We just enrolled our 3rd largest class in history in the midst of a pandemic. So another motivation for us was this halo effect should typically last 2 or 3 years. It's lasted longer at Butler, and we wanted to showcase that in the book. Also, those markets have opened us up to corporate partners. JP Morgan and Johnson & Johnson host our students now every year in New York. From a fundraising perspective, we just had a parent write $1 million check he works on Wall Street and had 2 sons go through Butler. So it opened up, the Big East was just monumental. And then you look at some other avenues where the university has just really grown. I mentioned applications, fundraising. Our endowment has grown $100 million in the last 10 years. It's almost doubled in the last 10 years. We've had 3 of our best fundraising years over this past decade, thanks to people like Lauren and Morgan. In 2016, we received our largest gift in history from a family who had no connection to Butler. Andre and Julia Lacey, they didn't go to Butler. Their kids didn't go to Butler. They had so much pride in where the university had come from and where the values at Butler were that they invested $25 million. Mark Bradford, I hope still is on the call, Old National Bank made a $5 million investment shortly after that. So the fundraising success has just been really phenomenal. Those first 5 years after the Final Four, we averaged $16 million a year. And then the last 5 years, we've averaged $36 million a year in fundraising. And many, many people will tell you they trace a lot of that back to the Final Fours. But the fact that that was really a front porch effect, that it simply opened up the eyes of a lot of people to all the good things going on at Butler. Finally, I'll wrap it up. One of the interesting things we mentioned, Gonzaga, they've had this great run, you know, over 22, 23 years, and I compare them quite a bit to Butler, but they've done it with one coach. We've done it with 6. There's some stories when Brad Stevens left, July 3rd, 2 p.m. Not that I remember, although I was in tears most of that day. There was a lot of gloom and doom that the Butler program was over, and it continues to sustain itself, going to NCAA tournaments, winning tournament games, and a lot of that is the culture. We have a whole chapter on the Butler way of what kept us, kept that cohesion. But Butler's really in a different galaxy now. I compare us to the family that won the Powerball, and we're still playing with the earnings to see what we can do. I see Trudy Rhodes and Tom Rhodes, great folks out in Phoenix. They can see about every game now. In the mid 2000s, we had to pay to get our games on TV. And so all of that's changed. I'm going to ask Jerry maybe in 2 minutes to bring us home with a couple lessons from the book, and then we're happy to answer any questions. Hopefully, Lauren, we're not going to go over time.
Sure. We spend the end of the book drawing a bunch of lessons that we think are pretty broadly applicable. I'll just highlight a couple that really stand out to me. The first one is that if you're in the attention-seeking business, which if you're on social media as an organization, anything like that, we're all trying to seek attention to get people to follow us, to come into our orbit, and that's not necessarily a negative thing. But you better make sure your house is in order, especially if you're gambling with something like an NCAA tournament. You don't know when that attention will come. Butler's house was in order. That first Final Four happened to be in Indianapolis. So people were flooding the city 6 miles away, flooding Butler's campus. Bobby Fong was the president at the time, and he said, let everybody come. We have nothing to hide. And over again throughout the story, you see that Butler did the hard work, especially culturally, of making sure that their house was in order before all this attention came. So they were able to withstand the kind of notoriety, the temptations, because everything was well aligned. That really stood out to me. I thought that I would find when I started talking to people, especially as an outsider, some kind of resistance. But this notion of the Butler way and this culture is very real. People kept saying that, but I've totally bought in. So count me as one of those outsiders who believes. The last one I want to highlight, when we're talking to Barry Collier and saying, what's Butler done differently? He said the one thing that people don't tend to talk about is patience, institutional, organizational patience, especially in a results-driven arena like college athletics, where everybody knows the win-loss record at all times, year-round, and those wins and losses are attached to people and follow them around. He said we've been patient. And if you look again across this long story from 1989 all the way up to the present, there's a tremendous streak of patience across the entire institution. And again, that really stood out to me. I found that comforting because I'm more of a patient person myself. I get perturbed by people moving too fast. So Butler has been patient and built something solid that they could really, when the time came, broadcast to people without shame or anything like that. And that's benefited them immensely, like we said, over this past decade. I want to stop now, although we could keep going for some time and leave some room for questions.
And last thing I'll mention, I'd be a bad fundraiser sales guy if I didn't mention, the book itself. I put the order link in there. We are donating a portion of the proceeds to an organization called Project 44. Lauren and I are both on that board. It memorializes Andrew Smith, who was on those Final Four teams, passed away at the age of 25, actually 5 years ago to this day, from leukemia. And that organization is trying to save 44 lives through bone marrow transplants and getting people to sign up on the bone marrow registry. So we're taking a portion of the book sales and putting it to Project 44. We've been very fortunate to get some great endorsements from the book so far. Mike Krzyzewski, Jim Nance, Thad Matta, Greg Popovich, San Antonio Spurs coach, of course, Bob Hamill. I'm going to put a couple of the endorsement quotes in the chat. Finally, Jerry and I are on the speaking circuit right now. We're happy to do this for any of your organizations. We're not doing this for any fees. But if you want us to speak to your company and drill down into some of the lessons on the book, we're happy to do that. Finally, again, want to thank you. Just a great honor to speak to this club, and want to thank Bob Hamill again. I hope he's on there. If not, somebody share these comments. But again, we have a lengthy list of acknowledgments, and Bob Hamill is at the very, very top of the list. No offense, Mom, but Bob is top dog. And again, this book would not have been possible without him. So with that, we're happy to take any questions.
I have a question.
Go
Yes.
ahead, Charlotte.
Okay, my question is, what academic programs benefited from this?
I would say all of them, but the business school in particular, the applications were already on the rise for the business school. But if you think about the application numbers and then the broader geographic regions that Butler was drawing from, it brings more geographic, ethnic diversity backgrounds to the campus. We have some statistics again, and this correlates with other findings of that halo effect that GPA, SAT, ACT scores have gone up. Lauren probably wouldn't get in these days with how the profile has gone up, but really I would say it benefited everyone. And then also the alumni and the graduating seniors, we have stories in there of how, companies might have crumbled up a resume and threw it away in the past where, we talk about a young man who was hired on Wall Street. In his initial interview, it was referenced the Butler. Oh, I know about the Butler basketball program. So that general awareness, I think, benefited not only incoming students, but alumni as well.
I can pipe in too and just say one other thing that people told us about was that it helped in faculty recruitment. So the Dean Emerita of the School of Education just said, again, that name recognition piece really matters just in terms of getting a foot in the door. So the faculty recruitment piece is often one that's overlooked that I've found when reading about this type of thing, but that is a very real thing.
Owen Johnson. You're muted.
Yeah, I was aware of that. As somebody who taught journalism for 35 years, I should mention that the Butler Collegian student newspaper has a long tradition of excellence. My question is, to what degree, if any, did you look at the example of Gonzaga, which parlayed success in the NCAA tournament into permanent basketball success? I think they're either number 1 or number 2 right now. And Butler started out as a Methodist school, if I recall correctly, and Gonzaga Catholic.
Yeah, great question. We did a deep dive. We have a significant section, I think 3 or 4 pages in the book on several of the other Cinderellas, but the highlight being Gonzaga, who's had similar results. I researched Gonzaga quite a bit. There's a book written on, different than ours, but there's a book written on them. And again, have great respect. If you looked in the 1980s, early 1980s, very few people would have heard of Gonzaga, maybe because John Stockton went there. Now everybody's heard of them. A bit similar to Butler. Again, the difference being they've had one coach during the duration of this success, whereas Butler has had 6. But we do a deep dive. We talk about some of the other Cinderellas and VCU and George Mason. But I just have tremendous respect for Gonzaga and a significant piece of our early part of the book.
Jim Bright.
Graham and Jerry, Butler's, like IU, seems to run a squeaky clean program. And you've had some iconic faces there in the Butler program. You mentioned Brad Stevens, now the coach with the Boston Celtics, Gordon Hayward. To what extent are you able to stay in touch with those guys? I'm talking about Butler now, and to the benefit of Butler.
Well, the Stevens have just been tremendous friends. They've continued to be very supportive. One of the really bright moves our president made was to ask Tracy Stevens, Brad's better half, to serve as a trustee. Shortly after they departed for Boston, and she still remains on the trustees. Gordon Hayward, as a fundraiser, when I saw the contracts he was getting, we're calling him every day. But no, I think, the thing is, like IU, and I was very sorry to hear about Wayne Radford passing away yesterday.
Oh.
Butler has a very tight family-oriented community. And, we're in touch with all of those guys who played on the Final Fours, and those coaches, you know, Todd Licklider, Thad Matta. Thad Matta lives a mile away from us. He's got 2 daughters at Butler right now. There's a good story too about how Thad and Brad Stevens talk about when they retire, they just want to come hang out and watch games at Hinkle Fieldhouse. But very tight-knit family, and remains as such.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question? Jim Bright, I see your hand raised again.
Yeah, I was just going to ask again, Graham and Jerry, about the NCAA and the fact that it's all being played in the state of Indiana. Any thoughts on what that can mean to Butler and perhaps, you know, to IU down here in Bloomington, hosting the NCAA tournament games?
Well, I think it's phenomenal. You know, we're all looking for good news right now, and I think there's no better state that can handle the tournament and could quickly turn around and say we could do it, and has the gymnasiums all in one, you know, relatively short geographic area to host it. And the backups could be the high school gyms, which some of which are, as you know, are bigger than Hinkle in terms of capacity. But I think it's a great thing. I always reminisce, or really wasn't born yet, when the high school tournament ended at Hinkle, the state championships. And here we are once again, where Hinkle's going to have a prominent place in terms of hosting the prominent tournament. I don't know if Jerry wants to add anything, but I think it's great for Indiana.
I'll only add to give a final shout out to Bob Hamill here. When he was reviewing chapters of our work, I was also working on this little essay that I just felt like I had to do, which is trying to understand why the moment I set foot in Hinkle Fieldhouse, it really mattered to me and felt almost like a spiritual experience. I played basketball through college, but really small basketball, certainly not the likes of would be worthy of playing in Hinkle. And so I sent that to Bob, and he very graciously read it and gave me wonderful feedback and started reminiscing about his own experiences. And so when I think about the tournament being in Indiana, I think about Hinkle. And I think about more people seeing that. I grew up playing basketball in the South and then moved up to New England and just didn't know about Hinkle. I knew about Hoosiers, but not Hinkle. So the more exposure that building gets, I just think the better for the sport, the better for the state, the better for Butler. So I think that's a fantastic element of this whole development.
Ashley, I know we're short on time. Would you spare me a 30-second story that speaks to Hinkle?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Okay, real quick story. One of our favorites. A couple of years ago, I was dropping some tickets off at Hinkle Fieldhouse at Will Call. I had my daughter with me, who had not eaten lunch and was very cranky. I told her, hey, I'm just going in and dropping the tickets off. So I dropped the tickets off. My daughter and I are coming out, and these 3 guys start sprinting at me. And they had driven all the way from New Jersey for the Georgetown Butler game that night. And the guy was like, can you please walk us around Hinkle for 15 minutes? So I was trying to choose between saying yes and having my daughter go nuts. Long story short, I walked them around real quickly. I bribed my daughter with the steak and shake, took them around for 15 minutes, and they were blown away. And at the end of it, the guy says, what do you do for Butler? And I said, I raise money. He pulled out his checkbook, wrote a $1,000 check, and said, thank you. And I think I say that because I think that's the impact of what a Hinkle Fieldhouse has on people. So thank you, Ashley. I'm sorry I tried to put us over time there, but I wanted to share that.
I want to add, because I know that basketball is really important and the business school is really important, but I want to go back to academic programs and see how you helped any of them other than that.
Charlotte, let's hold that question until after we close so that folks can go on their way. And Graham and Jerry, you have a minute to stay after our program to answer. Okay, great. So in honor of your presentation today, we'll be giving a donation to Beacon, formerly known as Shalom Center. Now it's under a bigger umbrella. And Sally Gaskell, tell us about next week's meeting.
Next week on January 19th already, our speaker will be Dennis Groth, the interim dean of the School of the Luddy School of Informatics, Computing, and Engineering at Indiana University.
Thanks so much. Let's have the four-way test so we can say that together, and then we'll answer some more questions. Of the things we
Think, say,
See,
Say or do.
first,
First,
is
is
it
it
true?
the truth?
second,
Is it fair to all concerned?
third,
Third,
build
is it
goodwill,
Build
build
goodwill
and better
and
friendships?
friendships.
fourth,
And fourth, will it be beneficial to all
Beneficial to all
concerned?
concerned.
And fifth, is
Is
it fun?
okay.
Liz,
Charlotte, we can get back to your question now.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry to, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I don't think this is a dead horse. Can you hear me?
yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, it's that I understand the importance of basketball and the business school, but I wanted to know what other kinds of academic programs might